We hear a lot at the moment about how the national response to COVID-19 is being led by the science. However, there isn't a single thing called science. There are different types of science and different types of scientists. Biological scientists, medical scientists, public health officials, health statisticians, and health economists, and so on. And even within these specialisms, the individual scientists will disagree about methodology, the interpretation of their results, and what these results might mean by terms of what should happen next. So the phrase led by the science is in some senses misleading, because we have to know what science, which studies, what scientists, whose evidence is being trusted. And of course science changes over time as new discoveries are made. The other issue perhaps with being led by the science is that science, in its very nature of course, is perceived and intended to be objective and intellectual concerning facts and results and data. And so we see graphs and statistics, and we hear about R values and so on, and phrases like flattening the curve. It's easy to forget, with the use of this language, that what we're talking about are real people, real lives, real families, emotions, worry, anxiety, loss and bereavement. So we should be glad of the science. Without it, the tackling of this crisis would be so much more difficult. We need the skills of the doctors and the nurses, the carers and the clinical academics who are fighting this disease, and equally in our hospitals we need the tools and resources at our disposal, the beds and the barrier nursing and the ventilators and the oxygen. But I would hope that we're led by something else. We're led by our humanity, by our compassion, by care, by mercy. A preference perhaps for the poor and the vulnerable, to protect them. Perhaps what we're led by is love of our neighbour. And then the science is a tool to that end. And so the values of a good scientist, and we need them of course, are logic and rationality and curiosity and critical thinking. But the values of a good shepherd are love and compassion and devotedness, and recognising the individual worth of each person, and mercy. And these two things are not mutually exclusive. There's a story on Facebook put up by a nurse, many stories like it, and you'll be seeing them in different social media, I'm sure, yourself. And this particular story is of a nurse who's been caring for a patient who came in on her first day on duty and was sedated and intubated and on a ventilator. And that nurse spent the last 15 days by this patient's side, offering care, holding her hand, squeezing her hand and offering reassurance. And when it came to day 15 and the patient was lifted out of sedation, the intubation tube was removed, they came off oxygen except through of course a face mask. And the patient wanted to say to the nurse that, "I love you." And the nurse said that although her shift was finishing, she was glad to share the moment of recovery with the patient, and said that she was thankful that she had experienced that day with her patient, and that perhaps her purpose in coming here was to save her life. And so this is a story in a way of technology and science and resources, but it's much more a love story, a story of compassion and humanity that led the nurse to care, the patient to love, and for that connection to be found, which gave so much reassurance, not only, I'm sure, to the patient, but to her family. And so, in this context, how do we follow the Good Shepherd? Well, if you're a doctor or a nurse, teacher, carer, supermarket worker, delivery driver, waste collector, then your purpose and values, of course, in this period are clear. But many of us will feel superfluous, useless perhaps. It's important to avoid indifference, to feel the reality of others, and that might lead us to be moved to think that we should be doing something. We all have our situation to manage, and to manage it well, to be at peace, to have hope, to know that all things will indeed be well, and to carry ourselves and those around us through this crisis. Our enemies, while we're all locked down and socially isolating and distant from our friends and families and our support networks, are indifference, impatience, despair even, perhaps depression, certainly anxiety. So we can pray for the deceased, we can give thanks for those who recover, we can learn to live with our own vulnerabilities as we self-isolate. We can be merciful to ourselves and to the others around us, be forgiving of ourselves and those around us. The Good Shepherd can be our support in this journey. The image of Jesus, the Good Shepherd, reassures us that we're not abandoned, that we can be lifted up, that there is a hand that can be offered to give reassurance, presence, care, so that we can say, I love you. And that can be our love story. So in this time, let's be shepherds to each other, to remember that we're led by the Good Shepherd. We're led by love, care and compassion, and that the science is there as our tool to help us through this crisis.